In the shuffling madness of the locomotive breath runs the all-time loser headlong to his death. Oh, it feels the piston scraping, steam breaking on his brow. Oh, Charlie stole the handle, and the train it won't stop going. No, it could slow down.
Well, greetings from the bucolic fishing village of Little River, Nova Scotia, Canada, and welcome to this week's reading of Captain John's almost live story half hour. I'm Jonathan White, and I'll be reading you a true life adventure from my first book. Everyone said I should write a book, this one right here. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed last week's adventure, The Pirates of Costa Rica Parts 1 and 2. I did receive a lot of positive feedback, and I have decided to continue doing this every week and post a link every Sunday morning. So my intention here, of course, is to take you away from the news and the craziness for a little while to have you accompany me on one of my adventures. This week's tale is how a man's life was saved at night, at sea, in a fierce storm, kind of like what's blowing right now outside the window. So I'm going to put this over here. Maybe you can see that we have a really powerful storm. There's snow and ice and rain that's blowing about 50, 60 miles an hour. Anyway, so get comfortable, grab your favorite drink, relax, and come along with me on the boat as we experience a baptism by Gale. All right, I'm going to put my glasses on, find the chapter, and here we go. All right. I had just finished an early dinner with Joelle and Mum, who was visiting, on our catamaran Jojo in Ventura Harbor, California, where we were then living. We had left San Francisco a few months earlier, in August of 1998, and I had secured a position as a captain for Vessel Assist, the maritime equivalent of the Automobile Association 2 weeks before. I was about to suggest a quiet game of Scrabble when the VHF radio became active on Channel 16. It was my boss, Dave Delano, the owner of the Vessel Assist franchise, which covered the waters from Point Conception south to Oxnard. We switched to a working channel, and he told me a commercial fishing boat was adrift north of Santa Rosa Island and needed immediate assistance. Now, even though I had been working for only 2 weeks and had limited experience on the old 33-foot Owens twin-engine cabin cruiser towboat, which was called Avta, it was apparent that I would be called to this rescue. Donnie, the primary driver, was on his way to an EMT class. I quickly gathered my gear, Joelle stuffed some sodas and bananas into my bag, and I ran the half-mile to the Vessel Assist dock and the boat. Dave met me there and had already paged my crewman, Rob. I ran down the ramp to the dock, started the engines, switched on all the navigation and communications equipment, and did a quick visual check. I hurried back up to the cramped office to gather as many details as I could about the position, size of the vessel, sea conditions, and the rate of drift. The distressed boat was equipped with a GPS, so I had an accurate position fix, which put him about 9 miles north of Santa Rosa Island, a distance of about 50 miles from Ventura Base. The small boat, named the Office, was a 24-foot radon, a sturdy one-man commercial sea urchin fishing boat, and the captain had reported to the Coast Guard that the sea conditions were moderate with a 2 to 3 foot chop. Little did we realize that those conditions were about to change radically and rapidly. Rob cast off and I motored slowly away from the dock, sitting up on the flybridge, enjoying the magnificent scenery of the mountainous backdrop, the clear blue sky, and the hundreds of boats securely tied up in the marina. Having entered the radon's position into my onboard GPS, the resulting computation showed that my target was exactly 47.8 miles away. With a cruising speed of 14 knots, I radioed the Coast Guard Control Center in Long Beach that I would arrive on site to take the radon in tow in approximately 3.5 hours, an ETA of 2200, which is 10 p.m. I then called my wife on the VHF radio to let her know that the weather conditions were getting a little blustery and not to expect me back until the early hours of Friday morning. The first indication that the weather was about to change was a sudden fierce gust of wind from the northwest as I turned after left into the channel leading past the breakwaters into open ocean. I quickly left the flybridge and returned to the inside steering station where I was to spend the next 7 exhausting hours glued to the radar, GPS and VHF radio. Leaving the protection of the breakwater, it became apparent that the wind was picking up rapidly. Seas were already forming, and there were 3 to 4 foot waves with whitecaps. Dave called me on the cell phone from his car on the bridge between Ventura and Channel Islands Harbor to let me know that he had just been buffeted by the building winds. He suggested that rather than steer a direct course to my target into the quickly building winds and seas, I alter course to the Anacapa Passage. I should then steer along the south side of Santa Cruz Island and make a strategic course decision in a couple hours. My choices at that time would depend on where the radon had drifted in the Channel Islands. Even though I have many thousands of ocean miles under my belt, these waters were fairly new to me. Joelle and I had sailed our 32-foot Fisher catamaran, Jojo, down to this area from San Francisco a month previously. We had cruised the north side of Santa Cruz Island and around Anacapa Island, but basically I was heading into unknown territory, at night, in swiftly deteriorating weather, and on an old boat I hardly knew. Rashly ignoring David's advice, I turned the bow of the boat west toward my destination and into the wind and seas. Not a good idea. We were instantly slammed as the bow rose and fell heavily in the short, steep chop. I quickly altered course to the east side of Santa Cruz Island and the Anacapa Passage as the sun set, the skies grew darker, and the wind and waves picked up. Turning the VHF radio to the Weather Channel, I heard imminent gales forecast up and down the coast. What was initially a routine rescue now had more ominous and dire overtones. With the increase in wind and waves, the lone fisherman in his small boat was being inexorably pushed toward the rocky reefs off the northeast point of Santa Rosa Island. I told Rob we were in for a long night, but we were both in good spirits and anxious to do our respective jobs well. The Coast Guard in Long Beach had strong radio contact with the office, but I was unable to converse with him directly at this distance. Coast Guard Group Long Beach had set up a VHF radio schedule with the fishermen. They will call him every half hour for a position update and to let him know my ETA. They also set up a radio schedule to monitor my progress. Because of the longer distance I now had to travel, I changed my ETA to approximately 23:30 hours. That's 11:30 p.m. The Coast Guard informed the fishermen, and he told them that his rate of drift had increased with the onslaught of the gale. The wind was continuing to increase, and the boat was rolling heavily as I rode the swells and waves toward the lee of Santa Cruz Island. It was pitch black out, and the windshield wipers were useless in combating the water pounding the forward windows. As we raced toward the Anacapa Passage at 14 knots, I anticipated that the seas would diminish as we found protection along the south side. This proved accurate, but the 32-year-old Avta still felt the effects of wind rushing over the island and creating large seas, even in the lee. Ahead was a very bright light, the type of intensity that only a squid fishing boat could produce. The boat slowly came abreast as we pounded our way up the coast, showed up on the radar screen as a target, and moved behind us. Suddenly, there was a dim flashing light directly ahead, barely visible through the sheets of spray and rain. I quickly scanned my chart and found small Gull Island, approximately 1.5 miles south of Santa Cruz Island, directly in my path. While trying to keep my wildly fluctuating flashlight beam steady on the chart, I noted that there is a 10-second flashing light with 16-mile visibility in perfect conditions. These were far from perfect conditions. The only way I had been navigating along this rugged coast was to use the radar and stay about 1 mile off, reasoning that the islands are steep too, and I should be clear of any dangers. Rob and I started to count the time interval between the flashes and independently came up with a 5-second light, not the 10 seconds as the chart indicated. I was getting a little concerned, kept checking my position on the GPS, relating it to the chart, not easy in a madly pitching boat, and looking earnestly at the radar screen, searching for the blip that would be Gull Island. I had just altered my course 10 degrees to port to give myself a wider margin when Donnie's voice came over the VHF speaker. He sounded quite cheerful. Understandably so, he was at home, and wanted to know how we were doing. I explained to him that there was a 5-second light just off our starboard bow, and I had no such light on my chart. He responded he wasn't sure of the correct interval, but he would check and get back to me. Right then, another voice, later ascertained to be a harbour patrolman, cut in, informing me that it was indeed a 10-second light. Now we were perplexed. Where exactly were we relative to Gull Island? Just at that moment, the island showed up on the radar screen as a distinct landmark separate from Santa Cruz Island. There was no doubt that the flashing light we were seeing was on Gull Island, even though the sequence was different. I informed Donnie that we were just off the island, proceeding at about 12 knots in zero visibility. 2 minutes later, the Coast Guard called the office for the scheduled 22:30 hours radio contact. When the fisherman responded with his position, I was able to pick him up on my radio, which indicated that he was closer to me. After punching his coordinates into my GPS, it was apparent that he was drifting at about 2 miles per hour and was heading for Fraser Point and the shallow waters off the extreme northwest tip of Santa Cruz Island. Our decision was made for us, and I plotted a course to take us through the channel between the two islands. Donnie came back on the radio to inform me that the seas, which were already large, would become more so as we rounded Gull Island and set off through the channel. His exact words were, "I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It's going to get even rougher." He advised me to keep closer to the shore of Santa Rosa Island, that the passage was clear of obstructions, and I shouldn't hit anything that goes bump in the night. Just then, the fisherman called on the VHF with a little fear in his voice and asked that we get to him as soon as possible, as he felt he would be on the rocks in less than an hour. As we turned to starboard to position the boat for its run down the channel, the seas felt much bigger, and the wind picked up its intensity. The night was pitch black, and nothing could be seen through the windshield, which was being pummeled with sheets of water every time we jumped off a wave. I pushed the 2 throttles forward, and with my eyes glued to the radar, told Rob to hold on. The boat speed climbed to 16 knots, and we were taking a beating. I was driving blind through the night, through the gale, through the waves, with nothing but the throbbing sound of the diesels in my ears and the eerie pale glow of the radar for company. Water cascaded over the boat. Rob and I were battling to hold on. Prudence dictated throttling back, but there was a lone fisherman helplessly being pushed towards the rocks and almost certain death. For the next 35 minutes, my eyes were locked onto the radar and the GPS. I was aware of nothing except the fierce, pounding motion, the water leaking around the old windows, the crashing of the boat through the waves, and Jethro Tull playing Locomotive Breath in my brain. It was indeed a shuffling madness. Ba-ba-ba-bum, bum, bum. I received a position update from the office, which showed him about 2 miles ahead of me. He figured he'd be on the rocks in half an hour at his current rate of drift. I requested that he give me a 10 count in order for me to get a radio cut, which then enabled me to obtain a line of position on him. The adrenaline was pumping fiercely now, and as we came out of the limited protection formed by the lee of Santa Rosa Island, the seas got even bigger. Excuse me, my favorite libation, water. I radioed the office that I would be on site with him in stock pages a matter of minutes, and he sounded relieved. But we were not out of the woods or rocks yet. It's not easy to locate a small vessel in appalling conditions like these. I thought I had him on the radar, but couldn't be sure if the fuzzy blip was his boat or a large wave. I told him I would switch on my powerful forward lights in the hope that he would see me. "Yes," he shouted through the radio. "Yes, I see you to the south of me, less than a mile away." "Okay," I responded over the VHF. "Flash your lights for me." "There he is," yelled Rob, pointing ahead through the water-streamed windshield. "Where?" I called back, struggling with the helm. "He's straight ahead, real close." As I throttled back to come in near to him, the size of the seas became apparent. We were in shallower water, and they reared up in a confused manner, pushed by 50-knot winds. Rob opened the companionway door leading to the deck, and the wind howled and pummeled us. Within seconds, Rob was soaked by blowing spume. He clawed his way to the aft deck and prepared to clip the tow hook to the bow of the radon. 15 seconds after he was on deck, a large wave broke behind the boat, soaking him in cold sea water. The fisherman turned on his running lights and his cabin light, which gave me a clearer target. Now I had to back down on him in 12 to 15-foot steep seas and hold my wildly bucking boat steady while Rob attempted to hook the towing clip through an eye on the front of the radon. Lesson learned here. In these conditions, don't do it this way. 3 times I maneuvered the stern of Avta to within feet of the bow of the office, with Rob leaning over the transom to hook the eye. The seas were confused, steep, and curling. I yelled to Rob that the fisherman had to come on deck, for Rob to throw him the tow line and for the fisherman to lean over the bow and clip the tow line on. Rob screamed back to me that it would be suicide for the fisherman to come onto his small and cramped foredeck, and that he would try to hook the boat again. At this point, we were perfectly lined up, with the bow of the radon about 4 feet off my stern. Rob leaned out with the pole, and all of a sudden, a huge wave lifted the radon behind us. In slow motion, the office towered above us and assumed a 30-degree angle on the face of the wave, her pointed bow aimed straight at our vulnerable transom. I shoved the gears into forward and slammed both throttles to their stops, yelling for Rob to watch out.